How does one man's love of gardening condemn an empire to war and put rockets under the rise of Christianity? The year is 305 AD, and the Roman Emperor Diocletian is about to do something totally unprecedented. He's about to become the first ruler in the history of his people to step down voluntarily. What a good guy, eh? No. His legacy includes the last and most extreme anti-Christian persecution in Roman history, burning churches and scripture, and ultimately Christians themselves in a failed bid to force them back to the traditional Roman faith. Once, when brutally suppressing a revolt in Egypt, he demanded that the killing continue until the blood reached his horse's knee. Hilariously, the horse promptly tripped over and got its knees covered in blood, but you get the point. This is not a happy-go-lucky fella. Yet he is a celebrated ruler. His rise brought an end to almost 50 years of crisis, when the Roman Empire nearly collapsed under the strain of repeated foreign invasions, civil wars and economic pressure. He has defeated the empire's enemies, reformed its government and brought stability after decades of chaos. What's more, he's trusted others to share power, handing control of the western half of his empire to a co-emperor, Maximian. He's also appointed a pair of deputies to further share the load. Galerius serves under him in the east, and Constantius serves under Maximian in the west. This system, dubbed the Rule of Four, or Tetrarchy, has worked for years. There are no enemies at the gates, no besieging army is demanding his throne, but Diocletian is getting on and he's not in the best of health, so he's going to retire. And he's taking his co-emperor with him. Sorry, Maximian. So, in an emotional ceremony in what is now Turkey, on the same hill where he was proclaimed emperor 21 years earlier, Diocletian steps down. Then he decamps to a beautiful palace in what is today Croatia. The two deputies, Constantius and Galerius, are promoted to become the new emperors, and fresh deputies are appointed in their places, Severus in the west and Maximinus Daza in the east. We'll just call him Daza. Trust me, there are too many people called Max in this story. So we have two new emperors and two new deputies. What could go wrong? Nearly a year later, the Western Emperor Constantius suddenly dies in York. Welcome to the olden days, where people are always inconveniently and inexplicably dying, sometimes with insane consequences. At this point, under the Tetrarchy system, we all know what's supposed to happen. His deputy Severus is supposed to step up and fill his shoes. But instead, the Roman forces at York make somebody else the new co-emperor, Constantius' son, Constantine. Poor lad, I bet he hated that, being unfairly tricked into the royal robes and forced on pain of tickles to accept the power of the state. He probably had to endure a celebratory feast too, and several rounds of applause. How terrible. And he was powerless to stop it. Even today, there's a statue of him at York depicting this difficult moment in his life. Look at him, all contemplative and sad about usurping lovely Severus. If it sounds like I'm being facetious, bear in mind that this is literally the excuse that Constantine gives the co-emperor Galerius, that the troops forced him to seize power. I don't know if they also forced him to pose in his late daddy's royal regalia and send the resulting portrait to Galerius, but he does that too. And Galerius, famously a cool cucumber, reacts to this thoughtful keepsake with almost murderous rage. According to one contemporary, he wants to burn both the portrait and the messenger that brings it. But some clever sausage points out that Constantine does have an army, and so that might be quite a provocative thing to do. So instead he offers a compromise. Severus will be co-emperor as planned, and Constantine can be his deputy. If he can avoid walking in front of any ahistoric buses, the young upstart will get the throne. Eventually. Constantine takes the deal in a can't blame a guy for trying kind of way, and to borrow a metaphorical device from the Nicolas Cage film Con Air, the bunny has been put back in the box. Except it hasn't though, has it? Because if you're going to pay off one fella who pops up with an army and a bit of royal blood, you might have to pay off a second. Remember Maximian, Diocletian's reluctantly retired co-emperor? Well, he's got a son too, Maxentius. I'll now refer to them as Max Senior and Max Junior. There are, as I mentioned, too many Maxes in this story. Anyway, Max Junior is a right chip off the old block, and now thinks he ought to be emperor too. In fact, his old man has come out of retirement to back him. Galerius can be co-emperor in the east, and the two Maxes will be co-emperors in the west. Co-emperors, if you will. Makes them sound chocolatey. But Galerius has run out of other people's thrones to give away, and he's certainly not going to give up his own. So he tells Severus to rally the troops and deal with the new pretenders. Severus then marches his men south from his capital in Milan to Team Coco's stronghold in Rome. But here's the problem, they're not really his men. They used to serve under Max Senior, and when they get to Rome, they defect en masse. Severus takes refuge in a fortress in Ravenna, and after a brief siege, makes a deal for his life and surrenders. Constantine, meanwhile, has been watching all of this with great interest. Presumably, sensing the way in which the wind is blowing, he throws his lot in with the Milky Bar gang, bins off his wife, sorry darling, and marries into the cause of the Maxes, taking their sister/daughter as his new bride. The unflappable Galerius, in a characteristic display of calm, invades Italy. Constantine bravely stands back and does nothing. The invasion doesn't go well, particularly for poor downtrodden Severus. Team Coco, recognising that you can't make a corpse emperor, decide to kill him. Yes, I know he cut a deal for his life, but we had our fingers crossed the whole time. That's the vibe. And it doesn't go great for Galerius either. He's closing in on Rome when his men also start switching sides, drawn in by the chocolatey appeal of the rival emperors. Galerius beats a hasty retreat to his own eastern part of the empire, pillaging Italy as he goes. The western part has slipped permanently from his control. So who's in charge of it? That's a bloody good question, and one which Maximian intends to put to bed. He's got a kinder surprise in store for Junior, and in April 308 he calls on the soldiers to ditch the kid and rally behind him. Team Coco has melted like a Mars bar on a radiator, split like a Kit Kat. Their partnership is now one big arrow full of holes. Sorry if I'm overdoing these chocolate gags, but I had a bunch written down and Daddy hates waste. Anyway, the soldiers actually prefer Junior, so the coup fails, Maximian flees Italy and eventually takes refuge with his new son-in-law, Constantine. Obviously, this is now a huge mess. Something has to be done. So Galerius arranges a conference at Carnuntum near modern-day Vienna in Austria. But why should anyone listen to him? If the upstarts didn't obey him when he had an army at his back, what hope does he have with this little get-together? He knows this, so he's bringing along someone everyone will listen to. Someone whose stature in the Roman world is beyond compare. Diocletian is stepping out of his palace for one last mission. And it's there at Carnuntum, it's later claimed, that Diocletian is asked to take power again. You can imagine the scene. This flawed and brilliant man, withered by age, by illness, by the long years of burden, asked to shoulder the immense weight of the empire a second time, to hold back the forces of chaos again, to stop another headlong charge into the abyss, to rescue his people from more decades of despair. Perhaps he sees it coming, feels the eyes grouping upon him, pleading, as another proposal descends into dispute. He stares at the floor, hoping that someone, anyone else, will rise to this terrible challenge. The sacrifice is total. He knows that this task will devour his remaining years, that he may well die without enjoying the peace that he must so dearly buy. But what if there's no one else? Can he shirk this responsibility? Who first gives voice to that inevitable question? Who braves the wrath of these other proud, vain emperors to ask what everybody else is already asking themselves? Why not Diocletian? How does he feel at that moment? Does his heart sink, knowing that once again this must fall to him? But then why had he come here? What had he expected? Had he really imagined that all they wanted from him here was his presence? Picture him now, rising uncertainly to his feet, the only man in the room respected by every other. They all of them watch in silent anticipation. Will he lead them again? The words he speaks now will forever shape the future of the Western world. He clears his throat and says something that will echo through the pages of history. If you could see the cabbages I grow with my own hands, you would not talk to me about empire. What? Cabbages? I mean, I like cabbage as much as the next guy. Kimchi, yum, sauerkraut, delish. But what variety of vegetable can so tempt a man that he'd rather watch his life's work wither on the vine than neglect his garden? Are these cabbages made of gold? Do they confer immortality? Is there some more depraved explanation? There's Diocletian, sat in a Roman bath which looks suspiciously like a modern hot tub, with several heads of cabbage floating around him, each decorated with googly eyes, a lipstick smile and a wig. And in his aged mind they're laughing at his jokes, complimenting him on his physique and rugged good looks, and urging him not to abandon them for the empty pleasures of power. Ladies, how could I, he smiles, taking another sip of his whiskey soda. Speaking of which, today's tipple is Lefroy. Now, Diocletian died over 1200 years before the first known production of whiskey, so there's obviously no good reason to link today's episode to any whiskey, yet alone this one. But Lefroy derives its unique flavour from burning peat, which is partially decayed vegetation. So, Diocletian, cabbages, vegetation, peat, whiskey. Yes, it's a tenuous link, just let me drink the whiskey. Okay. Cheers. Wow. It's been described as tasting like a burning hospital, which I freely admit is not something that will appeal to everyone, but it does have a smoky medicinal flavour. As it happens, whiskey was originally created as a medicine, aqua vitae, the water of life, so it's a weirdly appropriate taste. And personally, I love it. I've always been fond of smoky whiskies. If you'd like to get a bottle for yourself, there's a link down in the description. Affiliate links earn a commission to support the channel at no extra cost to yourself. As for the conference at Carnuntum, did it really go down the way I described? Who knows? The stuff about what he was thinking and feeling, that's my own fiction. But I can't take blame for the supposed quote about the cabbages. If it wasn't him that came up with it, it certainly wasn't me. And would he have said such a thing? Would he even have been asked to retake the throne? It seems unlikely. It'd be pretty bold to stand in front of a man like Galerius at the conference he organised and suggest somebody else should be in charge. But what we can say is Diocletian travelled over 300 miles to be at this meeting and went back home after, still not the emperor and having achieved nothing. If anything, the conference only makes matters worse. Max Senior is told in no uncertain terms to retire again, this time for good. Constantine, who has reverted lately to calling himself emperor, is busted back down to deputy. And Max Jr. is condemned as public enemy number 1. The Western Roman Emperor will now be Licinius, an old friend of Galerius, who's given a chunk of territory at the meeting point of East and West and told to use it as a launch pad for taking down Max Jr. He takes the land, thanks very much, and stays put. Constantine, meanwhile, happily ignores his demotion and carries on calling himself emperor. And Daza, remember him? The other Max, who we're definitely not calling Max because for God's sake, really? He's Galerius' deputy and is understandably miffed that while he's been quietly beavering away, yet another emperor has been proclaimed. So he starts sounding off that he should be emperor too. So all we've achieved is that there's now even more people going around calling themselves emperor. And Max Senior, he's learned absolutely nothing from all his recent misadventures, and he tries to betray Constantine. While the younger man is off fighting some Germans, Max Senior tells everybody that he's dead. What a flake. Sorry, couldn't help myself. Constantine, who is surprised to learn of his own passing, catches up with the cheeky old sod and gently suggests that he kill himself. There's a good chap. This he does. I don't know about you, but I'm kind of relieved. Finally, the number of emperors is going down. And don't forget, we're in the olden days. We're overdue an unexpected death. And now it's Galerius' turn. Yes, the miserable old git has cancer. Reflecting on this blessing from the heavens, he wonders if this might be the God of the Christians wreaking his terrible revenge. Galerius has been brutally anti-Christian throughout his entire time in power, and is sometimes said to have been the driving force behind Diocletian's earlier persecution. So he announces a new policy of religious tolerance and dies. Licinius and Daza split his half of the empire between them. And just like that, we're down to the final 4. It's time for the quarter-finals. Our first match pitches Constantine against Max Jr., who is suddenly sentimental about his treacherous daddy and thinks it's jolly rotten that Constantine made him kill himself. He declares war, but before he has a chance to invade France, Constantine has crossed the border and is sweeping across northern Italy. According to one account, his army makes so many of the enemy prisoner that they run out of handcuffs and have to start forging new manacles from the swords of their defeated foes. Round about this time, Constantine has one of the most consequential dreams in world history. The young emperor, once a patron of Mars, the Roman god of war, dreams that Jesus is before him, promising victory. All he has to do is mark his battle standard with the first 2 letters of Christ's name, written in Greek. When Max Jr. advances out of Rome to meet his rival's forces, he observes a strange new emblem on the enemy banners. He's roundly beaten and, like Augustus Gloop, is driven with his army into the river Tiber, where he drowns. Constantine advances to the final. Thanks, Jesus! Next up, it's Licinius taking on Daza for a shot at glory. Daza had counted Max Jr. as an ally, and now that he's forced to fight on alone, he tries to get the upper hand by striking first. He scores some early victories, but when he comes up against Licinius himself, he is soundly beaten despite having at least twice as many men. He's pursued south and tries to regroup, but ultimately kills himself. This was a bad outcome for Severus too. Remember him? Yes, poor old Severus. You might think that being dead and all, his troubles were over, but he had a son who had fled east after his death and sought refuge with Daza. Licinius, being very thorough, kills him too. Anyway, the cup final is upon us, and just like every great sporting clash, this one is brought to you by a sponsor. Me! Because I'm starting a new weekly quiz to test the mental muscles of all you history nerds. Each week I'm lining up 10 questions for you. Answer them right and make the leaderboard. Or don't if you're too busy tending to your cabbages. The quiz is open to everyone on the mailing list, where you'll find more trivia, book reviews, guest columns and more. A sign-up link is down in the description. And before we get back to it, please consider subscribing to the channel, dropping a like on this video, and commenting to say, what's one sexy vegetable you absolutely cannot quit? So, Constantine versus Licinius. This pair are ostensibly allies at this point. The latter has married the former's half-sister, but then as now, in-laws don't always get along. At some point, Constantine discovers a plot against him and suspects the hand of his rival emperor in the conspiracy. Fighting breaks out and a fragile peace is made, but then Licinius kicks the conflict back into gear with a bit of anti-Christian persecution. Constantine marches to war under the banner of Jesus, while Licinius represents the old Roman gods. Jupiter takes a good beating, and Licinius ultimately surrenders in exchange for his life. A few months later, he's accused of sedition and executed, along with his son, Constantine's nephew. What a wacky family. I'd love to tell you that while all this was going on, Diocletian was still living his absolute best life with his cabbage courtesans, but by the time the fighting is done, he's been dead for over 10 years. Some say he was so dismayed at the state of his former empire that he took his own life. I prefer to believe that he died comfortable in his own bed with his favourite cabbages gathered all round him. So there you have it. Constantine is our champion and moves his capital from Rome to Byzantium, which is renamed Constantinople in his honour. If you've ever been to Istanbul in Turkey, it's the same place. What's more, Jesus now has the backing of the most powerful emperor in the world, so the words Christianity and persecution never appear again in the same sentence. Right? Right?